All right, in this video, I'm going to show you how to get started with Unity. It's going to be a Unity introduction that I covered in class to some degree. So I'm going to review that, and then I'm going to go on to review the tank game tutorial that I asked you to do in class. So we're going to start off with starting to make a project. And so I'm in my Unity Hub, and you're going to want to make sure you download the latest Unity Hub. And in this case, I'm going to create a project inside of the projects area. The installs show the different kind of installs that I have on the left here of the hub. And I am not using the latest version of Unity for this demo. I'm going to use 2019.2.11. And that's because some of the packages and things that I want to use are actually a little older, and I want to make sure that they work inside of Unity. Sometimes things change as they create new versions, and certain things change in the code, and so you might get some errors on some of your scripts and things like that. To avoid that, we're going to use 2019.2.11. And so when I go to new here, I'm going to click on this little drop down arrow. If you have more than one version of Unity loaded, you can choose which one you want to create a project for. In this case, it's going to be 2019.2.11 F1. And I'll go ahead and choose that. And I'm going to use the default 3D, and I'll give it a name. Let's call this Intro Unity Video. And I'll also put underscore tank game. So I want to make sure that's going to the right place, somewhere easy. I can find it on the desktop because I will need to access the assets file or folder inside of the Unity project. So I'm going to make it on my desktop inside of my game design course. So this is actually last year's. So let's go ahead and go to the desktop, and I have Game Design 2020 on there. That's where I'm going to make this project so I can find it very easily. I'll select that folder, and then I'll go ahead and hit create. Now it's going to take a few minutes to go through and create all the files and folders that it needs in order to have a Unity project file. And it's going to be very important that you know where that is so that you can go in and edit the assets folder in that project. So we'll look at that in a second as soon as it's made. And when it's done, it's going to open up a new project inside of Unity. You can check at the top what version you're using. Again, it says Unity 2019.2.11. And I'm actually using what's called a 2x3 layout. And if you open Unity for the first time, then you might have the default layout, which looks like this. I don't really like this layout because I like to be able to see my game simulation and my 3D view right next to each other. And so I see my camera for my game view. And so I'm going to switch this back to 2x3 layout, and I think you should do that too if you're following along with this so that you're using the same layout I'm using. So here's my 3D view, and here is my game simulation that's looking through this camera right here. Now, it may seem like there's not much in here, but there's a couple of objects, and you can see that in your hierarchy window here is a list of all the things that are in your scene. And in this case, I have, and that might be collapsed in your case. So if you don't see anything, just click that little arrow there next to the name sample scene, which is what we're in. There's not much in this scene right now. And if I go back out, or if I bring up the folder for my Game Design 2020, I'll see that it made a folder called Intro Project 1, actually Intro Unity Video _ tank game was the one that we just made. So if I look at the dates and times here, I can see that is current, and I'll go ahead and click into that. And this is what's inside of the Unity project folder. It's got assets folder, library logs, and all kinds of things in here. You don't really want to mess with anything but the assets folder. The assets folder is what's going to have all your game objects in it. And right now you can see that all I have is a scenes folder, and inside of that is a sample scene. And that's kind of the default scene that they give you here inside of Unity. So that's this. And there's nothing there except the main camera and a directional light. So we're going to save new scenes, and we'll do that inside of the scenes folder. You see your project area over here in this window, and you can see that I can see the assets folder here. It doesn't show me any other folders because you really aren't supposed to mess with those other folders. And here's my scenes folder, and you can see there's that sample scene. Now, when you look on the far right, you're going to see something called the inspector, and the inspector is actually where if you select any game objects, you're going to see the components for those game objects. And right now I have the main camera selected, so you can see it says main camera at the top, and all of the components that are on the main camera that I can adjust. And you have a basic transform where this object is in 3D space. You can see that it's 1 in Y, and if you don't know your which way is which in the 3D window, you just look at your global axis up here in the upper right corner of the 3D window. And Y is the green one going up, X is red and it's going towards the left here, and Z is blue and it's going towards the right. And we can use our Alt key and the left mouse button to orbit around, and you can see that orbits around and moves that global axis. You can also use your Alt key and your middle mouse button to drag, like the hand tool, and then you can use your right mouse button to zoom in and out, or dolly in and out. You can also use the wheel on your mouse, so it depends on whether you have a good wheel on your mouse, whether that works good or not. And you have manipulators up here in the upper left of the window. So right now I'm in the move manipulator, which looks like arrows coming out in 3 different colors. And that is the local axis for that object. If I click this little where it says local and global to the right of those manipulators, it will actually switch that. So for instance, you can't really see any difference because there's no rotations on this camera. If you look to the right in the inspector, all of the rotations are 0, 0, 0. But if I were to select this directional light, you can see that it does have numbers in the rotations, and it doesn't look like it's straight. So that actually is rotated, and when I see it in local mode, the Y is not going straight up as it is in the global axis. And so each object is going to have its own local axis that will show you which way the object is manipulated, and then you will have a global axis that you can see on your in the upper right of the window, or you can switch to that by clicking on local on that top bar, and it will switch to global. And now the green one is going straight up, and the blue one is going to the side in exactly the same way as the global axis. And we can click it again back to local and see that that's different. So that's important to know about when you're working with your objects in 3D. It's really hard to actually see what's going on here because there's only 2 objects. So it would help to orient me if I go ahead and create a 3D object under the hierarchy menu, the hierarchy window here in the middle. So I'm going to click on create and 3D object, and I'm going to create a plane. And that plane is going to come up wherever my 3D view is kind of looking at, and it may not come up exactly in the middle of the world. You can see that I've got actually some numbers in the inspector in the position of this plane, and if I want it to be exactly in the middle of the world, I can click on the little cog icon to the right of the transform and choose reset. And reset will actually set all those positions back to 0 and rotations to 0. Scale is always 1, and we get our plane in the middle of the world. So now I know exactly where the middle of my global world space is. And that's sometimes called the origin point of this 3D space. And it's good to know that because you can sort of position all of your scene around that. And you want to look at kind of the scale of the icons and stuff. You don't want to make stuff too big when you're creating your objects. You don't want to make it too small either. So try to make it so that you can still see your icons well and select them well. So if it's too big, they might be too small. And then I'm going to take this plane and I might want to rename it to like ground. So I can do that up in the inspector and type in ground right to the next of the little checkbox there, and that little checkbox is to turn objects on and off. So if you decide you don't want to use something, if you turn it off up there, it will just sort of comment it out for the entire scene. And so I now have an object called ground, and it's plain white, which is going to make it a little hard to see, but I'm going to change the colors in a minute. Let's go ahead, and the first thing I want to do is I'll go ahead and scale this plane a little bit because it's a little bit small. I can see under it in my game view. I like it to be like a ground plane that kind of just goes out. And so I'm going to go ahead and put this at, for now, just like 5 in X and 5 in Z. And you can see I'm just typing it into the transform numbers. I'm not going to put anything in Y because a plane doesn't really have any thickness and it wouldn't do anything. But I can always change those numbers whenever I want. I'm just scaling it up so I can see a little bit more like a plane, a ground plane in my game view. And I could go in and select my camera, and with the move manipulator on, I can move it up and down if I want to move it up a little bit. And then I could switch to rotate here. So you have move, rotate is the arced arrows, and I can see the different colors on the manipulator for that. So if I want to just rotate it down in X a little bit, I can, like so. Now, it might help if I have an object there, so I'm actually going to go to the Create menu again, and I'm going to make a 3D object cube. And you can see it kind of just placed it wherever in there. The numbers are not consistent for anything. So I'm just going to reset it again, which will place it right in the middle of the plane at the origin point. You can see it puts it down into it too. Now, if I double click that cube over here in my hierarchy, or if I hit F in the 3D view, it's going to frame it. And you can see I have a real-time shadow there, but the cube is kind of down into the plane. And that's because the center of the cube is right in the middle. If I switch back to the Move tool by clicking the crossed arrows here in the upper left, you can see that the center is right in the middle of that cube. So it's placing that right at the origin point. If I want it to be sitting on the ground, which is going right through that plane, then I need to put like 0.5 in this cube's Y. And the reason it's 0.5 is because the scale of this cube is 1. So if the center's in the middle, moving it up 0.5 is going to put it right on the plane. So now I have a cube, and I'll orbit a little bit. And I can see that I do have sort of a shadow there. If I double click the ground over in the hierarchy, it will frame it and it will zoom out a little bit. Again, I can hold Alt key and the right mouse button to zoom back in if I need to. I'm going to select the directional light in my hierarchy. And the directional light, it doesn't really matter where you put it. Moving it doesn't do anything, but rotating it does. So it's like a sun that's infinitely far away, and so the rays from it are going parallel in a straight line. And if I rotate it, that will actually make it look like the sun is further down in the sky or straight up above. So if I, for instance, rotate it, the shadow goes closer to the object. If I rotate it down, then the shadow goes away from the object. If I rotate it in the green one, then Y, it puts it more on the side of the object. So that's kind of a nice effect to get that real-time lighting. And I can go back to select the camera, go back to my move tool, and you can use the WER keys to switch between your manipulators very easily, or you can click up here in the upper left. So I'm going to move the camera in. The camera, when it's on local axis, the Z-axis is basically where your camera is looking at. So if I want to zoom in, I just move it in on the Z, and that will give me a better view of that cube. I'll just move it down a little bit. Or I can maybe move it to the side so I get a little bit of a side view of the cube, and we could rotate the camera a little bit. Now, this is my main camera. It's got in its components all the different things that a camera would have. We could adjust the field of view, for instance, to get a little wider view or narrower view. And that is going to, if we widen it, it's going to produce some distortions. And then we also have a near and far clip plane, which can be seen inside of the 3D view. If I move the near one, it's kind of probably hard to see, but eventually it's going to stop seeing that cube, which is kind of close to it. And then if I start pulling the far one in, eventually, it's actually set to 1,000, so that's pretty far. I'm going to set it down to maybe, let's set it down to 100 so I can actually see it. And these are virtual sliders. If I hover over the far name and click and drag, it will actually allow me to drag that interactively. And you can see that it's going to cut off at a certain point. It'll stop rendering because the camera doesn't see it anymore. So we probably actually want this to be pretty far out. I could put it back at 1,000 for now, or even 100 fits my plane that I have. So with this camera, that's what's going to be showing the simulation. So that's what I'm looking at in my game simulation view on the bottom left here. And if I take my cube that has transform components, a mesh renderer to make it show up. If I turn that off, you see it disappears. And then a box collider, which is used with physics. If I add a component on the bottom, so where you add components in your inspector is at the bottom. And you may not see that unless you scroll down. But at the bottom of that, there's a big Add Component button. And if I click on that, I get a list of the kind of components I can add. And one of them is physics. And if I go into physics, you can see the box collider is here, but I want to actually add a rigid body, which is going to give me things like gravity and collision detection. And that's going to allow me to actually make it affected by other things in my scene. So if I switch back to the move tool, for instance, and drag this up, this cube up so that I can still see it in the game view. And then I put my rotate tool on. Then I can go in and maybe rotate it a little bit in a couple of different axes to create a little bit of an angle so that if it drops, it's going to hit on the edge and then roll a little bit or something like that. And so if I play the simulation, which is this big play button at the top of the window, of the top of the entire Unity interface, there's a big play button in the middle. And if I play that, it's going to run the simulation. I'll see it drop in both the views. So let's try that. So I see it drop and it hits and it rolls a little bit. And then it stops. And to turn that simulation back off, you hit the play button again. You don't hit the pause button. That's actually for debugging and testing, and whatever changes you make with the pause button on will not be saved. So don't use the pause button for now. Just turn things on and off by hitting the play button twice. It's like a toggle button. And you can see that that had an interesting effect. If I put on my game view at the top of the window of the game view, it says maximize on play. If I turn that on and hit it again, you'll see it will maximize your game view, and I can see that dropping and hitting and rolling. And then I can stop it and it will go back to my previous layout. So that's a nice thing to have on, maximize on play, so you can see things better. Sometimes you don't want it on because you want to see what's happening in the 3D view at the same time you're seeing it in the game view, if you're trying to debug something that's not quite working right. But I'm going to turn it on for now. So that gives me some simulations that I can see happening with the physics engine inside of Unity. If I want to go back to where the cube was, I'll just go ahead and type back 0, 0, 0 in the rotation and type in 0.5 in Y, and it's sitting back at the center of the world again. So I want to do a couple of things. I'm going to take this cube and I'm going to duplicate it, and let's name it. I'm going to go up to the inspector. I'm going to name it brick and hit enter. And I'm going to duplicate it a few times. Actually, before I duplicate it, let's bring in some other packages that we want to use that will have some materials and other things in it. So we will create materials, but I want this to go fast. So I'm going to bring in some packages that I showed in class. So first of all, the first package that I want to bring in is going to be in the Unity store. So I'm going to go to Window and go to the Asset Store. And that's going to open up the Asset Store. And I'm going to do a search. There's a little search symbol there, and actually you can see it's already in there. I'm going to search standard assets. So standard assets is what I'm going to look for. And when it searches for that, I'm going to look for something that looks like a gray sort of airplane model. And so it's actually Unity's standard asset package, and I'm going to click on that, and inside of that you're going to see that it's free, and you should have an account for Unity already if you have your Unity open, and you're going to want to buy that the first time, but it's free, so it won't cost you anything. But then once you choose that, you want to import it. So I've already bought this. I've used it before. So I'm going to go ahead and import that in. And it's downloading a package. So a package, a Unity package, is just a zip file. It's a special Unity zip file that is going to have all the files in it and the hierarchy structure for importing it into a scene. And here you can see it's got a lot of stuff in it. And this is going to just be stuff that we can use. It's going to be some materials, some textures, and some prefabs and other things, game objects that we can use. So I'm going to just import everything here. And because it's a fairly large package, it might take a couple minutes for it to uncompress and then load it into your scene. Okay, it's finished uncompressing the package, and it's loading it in now. And when it's done, what you're going to see is there's now in the project area, which is middle right under assets, there is now a standard assets packet or standard assets folder, and it's got an arrow, drop down arrow, which means that there's more folders under there. And you can see there's all these kinds of things in here, stuff for environment and stuff for characters, some character controllers and other kinds of things in there that we'll be able to use. So when you're done with that and you get that in, go back over to the 3D window and the tab at the top that says Asset Store. Just right click that and close that tab so we can get back to our 3D view. And then what I want to do is I'm going to import a couple of other things. So one way to import things is through the Asset Store. The other way is to go under Assets, and you're going to import a custom package. So I have a under Import Package, Custom Package, I'm going to be able to search on my machine, and I'm going to go to my Game Design 2020, and there is a starter pack that you can download from Canvas that will have some things in it that we want to use for the tank game tutorial as well as for this basic intro. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. This starter pack actually came with the tank game tutorial. It's a Microsoft tutorial that we'll look at in a little while. But this is what you want to download. It's a Unity package file, and go ahead and open that up. And again, it shows you what's in there. Go ahead and import everything in there. And that adds actually quite a few folders into this assets folder. So you've got a materials folder now. You can see that there's some materials there. There's some models and prefabs, and these are going to be used in the tank game tutorial. So, and there's a scripts one that we'll use quite a bit. I'm going to go to the scenes one. We're still working in the sample scene. Since I've imported so many things, I'm going to go to File and Save As, and go ahead and save a new scene file, and I'll save it into my scenes folder, and I want to call it intro demo or something like that, 1. And I'll go ahead and save that in there, and that saves everything that we've done so far. So I want to import one more thing, and that's going to be a script. So there's another way you can import stuff. You can do it out in the folders. So if I go find my assets folder inside of Windows, and I can see all the folders that are there now, I can go and copy a script into this scripts folder. You can see there's already a script there called player movement, which we're going to use on the tank game tutorial. But I'd like to add another script here, actually several other scripts that you can download from Canvas. So if I go back again to my game design folder, I can see that there is a C# script called shooter that I want to place in this folder. So I'm just going to right click and copy that and go over to the scripts folder inside of my assets folder for my project, and I'm going to right click and paste that into there. So now the shooter script is inside of my scene. And I have some other scripts for the tank game tutorial. They're actually in a zip file called Tank Game Scripts that you can download from Canvas. And just go into that Tank Game Scripts folder, uncompress it, unzip it, and go in there and just copy all of these scripts. Now don't copy the whole folder because there's a script already in the scene that has the same name, and you don't want two scripts with the same name in your scene. It will confuse the program and give you error messages. So I'm just copying the scripts, holding Shift down and copying all the scripts. And then I'm going to go over to my scripts folder that is for my scene, and I'm going to right click and paste. And it's going to ask me, do I want to replace the player movement script that's already in there? And I can just say skip that file. And therefore, I don't accidentally have two of those same scripts in there. That's very important that you don't do that, that you don't copy scripts multiple times into different folders, because that will cause you error messages in your game. So if I now go back into my game and look in that scripts folder, I can see all those C# scripts are there now. And that's important to get in there because we want to use some of these, and I don't want you to type these in from scratch because this isn't a typing class, and it's easy to make syntax errors. So I will talk about these, but I don't need you to type them in. So if you are making a new script, I'll show you, you do that in the project area and you choose C# script under the create menu. And when you do that, if I call this my script, and the first thing you should know that you don't ever put spaces in your names in scripts. You can see that I start my names with an uppercase. I have no space, and if there's multiple words, I uppercase the second word. And that's true in coding too. And if you come from any sort of computer graphics background, this is the way you had to do it. It is true for scripts. You can't have spaces in your names, but I do that even with my project names and everything as well. So I'm going to hit enter on that, and it's going to create a template that if I right click this and choose open, it's going to, and you can also choose it at the top of the inspector. If I say open, it's going to open Visual Studio, and I can see what that script looks like. Now this script is just a template of a C# script in Unity. And so it's got a starting point. It's not completely blank. It's got some lines that say using system collections, using Unity Engine at the top. Those are to bring in different classes and methods that are needed for most scripts, any sort of Unity script. And there's going to be other things that we'll add for particular kinds of scripts that use extra things that are not used all the time. And then there's a public class, and it's using MonoBehavior, which is Unity's version of C#, and or it's like the behind-the-scenes coding language inside of Unity. There's a bunch of commands in that your editor will be able to color code different things as you're working in C#. So it's Unity's version of C#, and the editor comes with Visual Studio. This version of Microsoft Visual Studio is free, and it comes with Unity when you load it up. So it should open automatically. And so public class is the name of the script as well as the class. You'll notice they're the same, and that's important. They have to be the same. And that is whatever you name it, it's usually descriptive for whatever the main thing this script does. And this is a very generic name because we're not really doing anything with it. But then it's got two methods or procedures in it. Whenever you see void start or void update, that means it's a method or procedure. People call them different things, but it's basically a collection of command. It's a container for a bunch of lines of code that you want to run at a particular time in the game. In this case, when the game starts, it's going to load stuff into memory, and you want to put it in this start procedure. And then when it's running, the game has a continuous loop that's checking update. And so therefore, if you want things to interact or the game or the system to always be checking what's going on and the inputs and other things, it's going to look in update. You'd put those lines inside update. And there's other ones that you would put in here too that are continuously checked, like collision detection and things. So this is the basic structure. Your methods or procedures always start with parentheses, which will have the inputs to that procedure, and then an open curly bracket and a closed curly bracket, which is the start and the end of that procedure. And if it says void on it, that means that there's no outputs for the procedure. Sometimes procedures will need input, and then they'll need to spit out some data or something at the end, or a name or something like that. And then this would not say void in that case if it had actual outputs, but a lot of them don't, and you'll see just void. Okay, so we want to look at a shooter script that has a shooter mechanic in it. And I'm going to go back to Unity, and I want to place that shooter mechanic on a first-person controller. So right now we have a camera in our scene, and we don't have any kind of way of moving around in the scene. So in the standard asset script that you imported, there is a characters folder, and if you open that up, there's a first-person folder, first-person character controller folder, and if you open that up, there is some prefabs, a prefab folder. So we want to find that characters, first-person character controller prefab. And the FPS controller is the one we want. That's for a first-person shooter. And I'm going to take that. It looks like a blue cube. And the way you bring stuff into your scene a lot of times is to just drag it in. In this case, this is a prefab. And a prefab is sort of a master object that you will drag into your scene, and it will make an instance of it. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that prefab in, and you can see it takes over the game view with the camera that's on that master or that instance of the FPS controller object. And you can see it's in my scene. If it's blue in my hierarchy menu, then that actually indicates that it is a prefab. So if I open up this object, I can see that there is a child to it. If you see the arrow, you know there's a child. And that first-person character is where the camera is on this first-person controller. So there's the controller itself that, if you look in the inspector, has a transform node character controller, which has various components for walking on a hill and for a step offset and slope, where beyond a certain angle it'll start to slide, movement distance when you're walking, things like that, the height of the character controller. And then there's a first-person controller script that has several things having to do with the looking and the head bobbing and the walking speed. And then there's a rigid body and an audio source. So when you bring this FPS controller in, you're going to get something occasionally. You'll get a warning that says you have 2 audio listeners in the scene, because cameras have audio listeners on them, and you're only supposed to have 1 in your scene. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the main camera by selecting it and hitting delete. And that just leaves my FPS controller, and I can then go ahead and double click on it to zoom in on it. And you can see that it's actually kind of down in the floor. So I'm going to grab the y-axis and move it up. There's like a pill-shaped collider, it's green, that is basically your character controller collider, so that if you hit something, you'll stop or you'll bump into it. And in this case, you don't want it to be stuck in the ground. Sometimes when you drag it in, it'll be stuck in the ground, then you won't actually be able to walk, because your character controller collider will collide with the ground collider. There is a collider automatically on the ground on the plane. So if I hit play, once I pull it up like this, it will actually allow me to look around, and I'll be able to walk forward and walk backwards. And I'll be able to jump with the space bar. So I'm using the arrow keys, or you can use WASD, and you can walk around. You can look around with your mouse. Okay, so the character controller's working, and maybe you could hear, I'll turn my audio up a little bit more so we can hear the footsteps a little better. But that's working, and now I want to go and just place some materials. We got a materials folder when we imported some of our assets. I'm just going to place some materials on my different objects so that we can have something to look at and it's not all white. So the brick object, I'll go ahead and double click that so we can zoom in on it. I'm going to take this wall material and I'm going to drag it onto the brick so that we have some kind of material on that object. Looks like a cinder block now. And then the ground plane, for that I'd like sort of like a ground, maybe grass type of object. Now I do have a player material 1 for the tank game that I could use as green, but we could also just have our materials folder selected and go to create material and create a new material, and we'll just call it ground MAT, no spaces in the names. And so ground mat for ground material. And then in the inspector, I'll click on the color swatch and we'll make it green, and we'll make it kind of like a mid-tone green, not too bright green, and say just close that. You have HSV or RGB. I like HSV, or you can switch between them however you want, but just using this color swatch is probably the easiest way to pick a color, and then close it. And then if I want to have that on the ground, then I can just drag it onto the ground. I can drag it onto the ground in my hierarchy view or in my game 3D view. So either way is going to work to drop it onto that ground. And if you click on the ground object and you go to the bottom, you'll see that that material is there. I can go back to the material, and the albedo is the main texture. If I want to, I could click on the circle next to the blank box where it says Albedo, and when I imported all those packages, it imported some textures with that, so I could probably find some decent grass textures here that I could use that we'll use when we do our terrains later on. But I could just click on either one of these, and let's do the grass rock one, or no, let's just do regular grass. And you can see it's kind of mixing the texture with the material color that I made. And it looks a little blurry. It doesn't look terrible, but it's really a small texture. So if I really wanted it to look okay, I'd probably want to tile that maybe 5 and 5 in the X and Y would look a little better, or maybe even more, like 10 and 10 would be. It's a seamless tiled texture, and that gives me a kind of like a golf course type of look. Now, if I go into it doesn't have any real bumpiness on it because I don't necessarily have a normal map for that. If I wanted to find one, there are some normal maps in here. I could probably test out some of these objects to see if they look decent as a normal map. For instance, if I just want, I don't have a normal map actually for that grass texture, but let's say I wanted to put just some waviness or something on it. There's some other ones in here that might look okay if I place them on. Actually, that looks like water waves. That one looks a little better. It's still water, but I could probably use one of those. So, okay, that's fine. We'll just go with that. There's also cliff normals that I could use. That looks a little weird. So I think I'll go back and just go back to this water waves. So we've got a ground plane there, and we'll do more with textures and normal maps and other things later on. But I want to go ahead and work with the shooter script now. So in the scripts section, I added a shooter script, and we'll go ahead and right click that and open it up. And I want to place this shooter script onto my camera, so of my FPS controller, which is the child object to the FPS controller, is where the camera is. And that's because when you shoot, you want to be able to shoot wherever you're looking. And in this case, I'm going to shoot right out of the camera. So to place the object on there, the script, I want to find the Add Component button in my inspector for that camera on the FPS controller. And then I'm going to go to Add Component and find Scripts. And the shooter script should be in the list of scripts there. I'll go ahead and choose it. And when you do that, you'll see it'll come up in your components, and it's looking for a couple of things: a projectile, which is a rigid body, and a sound that it can use as a shooting sound. So I'm going to go ahead and make a projectile for that. I'll just create in the hierarchy menu a 3D object, and we'll make a sphere. And it doesn't matter where you place that, just as long as you can kind of see it. I just need to do a couple of things with that and make a prefab out of it. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my materials and choose a material for this, or I could create another material and call it projectile matte, and give it some kind of color that we'll be able to see that's maybe different than the other colors in here. Let's just make it sort of pinkish. And we'll make it kind of metallic by pulling this up. And I can see the little shader ball there and see kind of what the adjustments are when I pull up the metallic area and the smoothness, adjust that a little bit. If I drag this onto the object, you'll see that we can see it there too. And as I make adjustments on this material, you'll see it come up on the actual object there. So if I really want it sort of like a metallic shiny, I can do something like that. And then I'm going to make this into the thing that I'm shooting. And so in order to do that, the script is expecting something that has physics on it in a rigid body. And this sphere, when I select it, doesn't really, it has a collider, but it doesn't have anything other than that, other than the mesh renderer and now the material at the bottom. So I'm going to actually call this projectile, and I will add component, and I want to go to physics, and I'm going to add the rigid body again, like I did with the cube. And in this case, it's got the gravity and everything on it, the collisions and things. And that's all I really need to make it into a projectile that I can shoot out of the camera. So to do that, I have to spawn it, and that's instantiating the object. And it needs to be a prefab. So I already have a prefabs folder, and I'm just going to drag with my left mouse button from the hierarchy to the project area where it says on top of the prefabs folder, and until it turns blue, and then I'm going to drop it in there. And now you can see that I have that projectile in my prefabs folder, and it's been made into a prefab. It's blue. And that's a master object that I can now instantiate or spawn. I don't need it anymore in my scene, so I can go ahead and delete it. And it's saved as a master object in my prefabs folder. So I'll go back now to my first-person character where the camera is, and I'll go find where the shooter script is at the bottom, and I'm going to drag that projectile down where it says non-rigid body. So I'm just going to use my left mouse button, click and drag. Be careful not to just click on it, because then you'll replace what you have in your inspector. It's a technique that you have to learn, to click and drag without letting go of the left mouse button, and drop it when it says plus and it's blue. You can drop it into that field, and now it will access that projectile prefab in order to shoot it, in order to shoot it out of the camera. And then we need a shoot sound. I do have a sounds folder here, and we've got a fire sound. I'll go ahead and click and drag that down to where it says shoot sound. Now, it's not actually going to make the sound unless I add an audio source here. There's no audio source on this first-person character, so I'm going to need to go, if I'm actually putting a sound to play into a script on this object has to have an audio source. And so I'll go to Add Component, find Audio, and choose Audio Source. And I don't have to plug anything into it because it's actually going to play it through the script. But I have to have the audio source on there because it's going to look for it in the script. And we'll look at the script in a second, but let's just go see what this looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and play it. And I can look around, and I can move with my character controller. And then if I press the left mouse button, it will shoot an object, and you can see that I can actually shoot it at the cube and knock the cube with this object. And if I keep shooting it, I'll probably knock it off the side of the plane that I'm on. And you can hear the chute sound and everything there too, which is coming through the audio source. So that's giving me the shooting mechanic, and that is coming from a script. And if I go click on that script or click on Visual Studio to look at that script, what is happening there is we've got all the same sort of template I was showing you earlier, but this one's called Shooter. The class is called Shooter. And then it's got some comments in here to tell you what it does. There's a block comment at the beginning, right after the declaration of the class, and that's got a /* and a */ at the end of the comment. That allows you to do multiple comments that won't run as code, and you can write little things to yourself or other people that might look at this script. You have line comments throughout as well, and that's 2 // and anything after that on that line will be commented out. Those are important to know and to put in, especially when you start coding. And then at the beginning of a script, usually that's where you put your variables that you need to bring stuff into the script. And in this case, the way you're bringing it in is through the inspector, and that's the public keyword here. So when you see public, it actually means it's going to show up in the inspector as some kind of field that you can plug something into. And then it's going to save it in these variables. And they're of different types. They're rigid body, float, which means a decimal number of some kind, and audio clip, which has to be a sound file. Audio source doesn't have public, so it's not going to show up in the inspector, but it is going to be used down here in some other commands. So it's declaring an audio source variable in order to use a get component command to find the audio source that we added to the camera. And that will actually just find it and pull it off of there so we can play a sound through it. So all of these ones that say public are allowing you to actually put stuff into it. And sometimes if it says equal to something, then it's actually plugging it in here in the code. So if there's no equal sign, it means you're going to have to put it in the inspector. It'll be blank. And if it does have an equal, then that's called assignment. It doesn't mean it's not equal in the standard math sense that 10 is equal to 5 plus 5. It's actually assign 30 to the shoot speed variable. So that's something that is going to be important to know, and sometimes you are going to want to actually put numbers in there rather than have somebody type it in. And then down here in the start, it needs to find the audio source, so it's doing that at the start of the game, putting it in memory, the name of it in memory. And then in update, it's looking continuously for you to press the Fire 1 button. And the Fire 1 button inside of Unity is set to the left mouse button. So there's a couple of things. There's a control button on your keyboard and a left mouse button, which is set to Fire 1. And that's an input setting. And so it's saying here, there's a conditional statement. This is the logics of this, that if the Fire 1 button is pressed and let go, so it's actually get button up instead of get button down. These input.get button up and other things, if you hover over it, it tells you how to use it here. And it's a built-in command inside of Unity in this classes that you're using, and the dot syntax, the dot get button up, is referencing a particular command. And there is a get button down. You can look it up in the documentation, and we'll want to start getting used to doing that. But this one is saying, okay, when you press and then let go, you're going to trigger Fire 1, and that's going to do everything if that's true. So whatever's in an if statement, whatever's in the parentheses, it's going to evaluate as true or false. If it's false, it won't do anything inside of the curly brackets. And if it's true, it will take what's inside of the two curly brackets here and it will run those lines. So we have 3 lines here that it will run. It'll run rigid body, new shot equals instantiate. So that's saying, okay, we're going to run an instantiate command, and we're going to spawn the projectile, my projectile, which is coming in at the top up here as a variable. And so that's what we plugged in, my sphere. And then take that and set its transforms, its position and rotation according to whatever the camera is, whatever this object that has the script on it, and set it as a rigid body and put it in this new rigid body variable called new shot. So it instantiates something and it catches the name in this rigid body variable called new shot. And then it takes that and it uses a dot velocity to transform it forward. So dot velocity is built into rigid bodies, and when you tell it a direction like dot forward, which is actually positive z inside of Unity, and you multiply that by some kind of number, then you actually will get it propelled forward or propelled in the z-axis, the positive z-axis. And our shoot speed is 30, so it's multiplying by 30 at the top. And then it's taking your audio source and it's doing what's called a play one shot, which is built into Unity to just play a sound once. And it's using the shoot sound. Again, we're plugging that in at the top inside of the inspector, and it's putting it in the variables and using it here. So that's how this script is working to do the shooting inside of Unity. And here's what it ends up looking like again. You get these fields, you put in the projectile, you put the 30 is already in there. You could change it if you wanted it to shoot further. You could put a bigger number, and if you wanted to shoot less, you could put a smaller number. If I put, for instance, put 5 in there and play this again, whenever I shoot, it's not going to go very far. It's sort of like bowling. So those are the things that you can do to get the shooting mechanic working. I'm going to go ahead and set that back to 30. Okay, so if we want to create something interesting, that shooting mechanism will allow us to do that. And so I'm going to go ahead and take this cube here in the 3D view, and I'll go ahead and select it, the brick, and I'm going to make a wall. So I'm going to use my Alt and my right and my middle mouse button to drag around so I can see it a little better. And then I'm going to duplicate this. So the way you duplicate is under Edit. You can choose Duplicate. It's also Control-D. And when I duplicate this, it's going to make a brick one. And I'm going to hold the Control key down and drag I have the Move tool on, and I'm going to drag it in the blue axis to the side to create another brick, or to move the brick. There's already a brick there. I can see it in the hierarchy. It's sitting right on top of the other one. So that's going to be, it's sitting right on top of the, so I'm going to move this. It's already duplicated something because I can see that there's a brick 1 here, but it looks like it's the same because it's sitting right on top of it. So I want to move it off to the side. So if I move it, I can move it like that in the Z-axis, but I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo. And this time I'm going to hold Control down, and I'm going to drag it. And you see it pops 1 unit. And so it goes exactly the size of the brick to put a brick next to it that's perfectly placed. And that's because you have snap settings under Edit that are set by default to 1. So holding Control down on Windows actually will kick that snap in, and you can then just move it 1 unit without having to try to eyeball it. You don't want objects sitting inside of other objects. When the physics kicks in, the colliders will kick in, and they'll actually propel away from each other, which would be bad if you're trying to build a brick wall. So you actually want it to be perfectly next to it and not overlapping it at all. So that's why I'm using the snap. And if I hit Control D to duplicate another one, which now I have a brick 2, then if I hold Control down, I can just drag it and make another brick next to it. Again, you can go to Edit Duplicate and Control and drag it, or you can do Control D if you wanted to speed it up a little bit and hold Control down and pull it to the side. So you can see that I put 5 in a row that are right next to each other. And it's very easy for me then to duplicate those. And it would even be easier if I were to put them under one object and duplicate that one object. So on your Create menu in Hierarchy, you have something called an empty, Create Empty. And that's used for hierarchies. That's used for pivot points and hierarchies inside of for animation and for organizing your 3D assets. So I'm going to go ahead and create an empty, and it's just nothing but a transform. It doesn't even show up in your render. But we can make it the parent of all these bricks, so we can move them and duplicate them all at once. And I can just call it bricks. So I can just call it bricks. And if I then make these bricks in my hierarchy child to it by shift selecting them, so I held shift down, I selected the first one and the last one, so it selects them all, and then I left mouse button drag them until bricks turns blue and let go, it makes them child to the empty. So you know it's child if they're indented in and the empty has a little arrow next to it. So they're now child to bricks. And that allows me to select the parent and duplicate them all together or move them all together. So I'm going to select the parent bricks and Control D, and then that gives me a bricks 1, and I can see that there's 5 new bricks under it. And then with the empty bricks 1 selected, I'll hold Control down and I'll grab the green arrow and move it up, and it'll snap up one unit. And then I can take that whole bricks 1 and Control D and make another one so that I have 5 more bricks. And then I can go in and grab the green arrow and hold Control down and drag it upwards and make another one. And that's how I can make a whole brick wall that has a bunch of individual bricks in there. So if because I'm duplicating bricks that have all of the physics stuff on them, the rigid body and a box collider, they'll all react to being shot by the sphere. And so if and you can see that I did it in the wrong axis. My guy's actually standing in a little bit different spot. So I'm gonna actually, let's just zoom out here for a second. And I'm standing to the right of that. So I can just grab my first person controller and move him over this way maybe a little bit. So, and we can rotate him. We can go into rotation and rotate him so he's kind of facing at an angle towards those bricks. So I'll go ahead and run the simulation, and the bricks stay where they are because they're not overlapping or anything. I can walk over here and I can shoot something at those bricks and knock the entire wall down, and they all react to the physics of it. I can continue to shoot at those. Now there is some settings if you decide, oh well, I'd like it to really affect those bricks more, I could increase the mass of my sphere. So my sphere is actually over in my prefabs folder, and it's got rigid body on it, and it's set to a certain, just the default of mass of 1. If I were to put that on a mass of 2, it's got a higher mass than the bricks. And so if I shoot at the bricks, it's going to affect them a little bit more. And then if I were to go in and take that master sphere object and put it up to, say, 5, then it's going to a mass of 5 now, and shoot it. It's gonna, you saw some of those bricks actually flew way back, so it's affecting it even more.